Steve and Alan's Pro Tips in a short time. Learn a lot.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Alan. For today's quick pro tip, we're actually going to go to an extended pro tip, a little bit longer. And I have asked Dr. Lucas Petersen to join us. Lucas is clinical assistant professor of bands at Purdue University, where he is a part of their very large and comprehensive band program.
Ooh, hey, can I ask about the big bass drum in the marching band?
You may not. We have more
Mm.
pressing matters, including first welcoming him to the program. Lucas, thank you for joining us.
I am absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So at Purdue, you spend quite a bit of your time working with your bands on what most of our listeners would consider advanced repertoire. But prior to Purdue, you spent plenty of time in the trenches, so to speak. And I am particularly curious how you would recommend our band, orchestra, and choir teachers who work primarily with beginners, students in their first, second year of playing, and how you would evaluate the quality of repertoire.
Sure. And I would like to preface the entire conversation first by saying that, especially using today's theme, today's Valentine's Day for those of you listening, and for using today's theme of love, in that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And we have to recognize that what is quality and useful to one person might be vastly different to another person. But that being said, I want to reassure you and everyone else listening that the criteria and the metrics that I personally use to assess quality in music, not just specifically band music, not specifically challenging or more advanced band music, but all music can really be boiled down to five pretty easy to apply criteria to all music, I should say.
All right, can you give us a preview on what those five are, first of all, and then we'll maybe dig into each of them?
Sure. And this is in my order of importance. Number one would be balance and structure. Number two, uniqueness and surprises. Number three, consistency and cohesion. Number four, genuineness and ingenuity. And number five, craftsmanship and orchestration.
I know that there's going to be a place to fit in the big bass drum in one of those.
Okay.
Probably in the surprises column.
Yeah. So let's dig into balance and structure. When we're talking about a piece that is only going to be about a minute and a half long, I mean, how many other ways are there to structure it?
For me, when I'm looking at a piece of music, I can see that it has, or I can hear that it has clear form with a good mix of repetition and contrast, and that it shows thoughtful design with some intentional choices. And by form, I don't mean necessarily confined to a traditional musical form like ABA, rondo, through compose, etc., but I only mean that it's cohesively structured. I'm looking at how the music unfolds over time, no matter the duration, how those ideas are introduced, developed, and concluded. But I truly think the most important words for this category and for all of the categories are that the music shows thoughtful design and intentional choices, which is something that can happen in a minute and a half, one page piece of music using the first six notes. It can also happen in a full symphony. The quality doesn't really know scale. The quality is the quality.
All right, let's go on to uniqueness and surprises. I think this one is probably pretty obvious, but maybe we're overlooking something here.
Right. The surprises could really be anything. It could be, just a different chord or a resolution that
Or a big bass drum.
Or a
some
big bass
unique
drum, Alan. Yeah.
some unique percussion colors,
There we go.
i.e.,
Yes, unique percussion
i.e.
color.
a big bass drum, dynamic,
Such as, yeah.
yeah, literally anything. But going back to the first point, the best surprises I think are ones that arrive through thoughtful design and intentional choices, and not just by a happy accident of clicking through Sibelius. The music should be unpredictable enough to keep you engaged and require a little bit of time to fully understand, but I think that has to be relative to the grade level and your proficiency at reading a score. And I say that last one because I think some educators confuse complexity and difficulty with quality. But let's not forget that the earlier we are in our career, the longer it's going to take us to ingest a score, no matter the difficulty.
So we've had balance and structure, uniqueness and surprises. Number three is consistency and cohesion. My complaint about beginner choir, band, orchestra music is it maybe is a little bit too consistent. So what do you mean by that?
For me, it just means that the intent and care given to the overall piece and to any one section is going to be the same throughout. We've all performed pieces where we just love playing this one specific part and it really did something for us musically, but then we get to another part and we're just kind of like, eh. And this is something that, is not exclusive to band, choir, orchestral music. For example, I was listening my lovely wife, who I love very much, I should say, on this Valentine's
Happy
Day.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
Yes.
It
happy
is
Valentine's.
Valentine's Day. Yes, let's remember that.
When the list for the Grammy nominations for the best song came out, we listened to every single one in the car. And after every one, she wanted to know what my take on it was. And after most of them, I just had to say, it was fine. And when I listened harder and further, I could tell that I really liked maybe the verse of one, and the chorus just didn't quite do it for me. So it's not exclusive to our world of band, choir, and orchestra.
And number four, genuineness and ingenuity. Those sound like big words, Dr. Peterson.
Those are, but I think they can be applied to all levels of music. To me, it just means that the music feels authentic and creative within its style without being pretentious or shallow. There was an article in the Washington Post about 20 years ago by Stephen Budansky entitled "The Kids Played Great, but That Music." And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the article, but
Oh, I am. I make my method students read it every year.
I don't think we need to belabor this point too much because I think a lot of us are aware of it. This is one of those, like, you kind of know it when you hear it.
So I actually, when I talk about this article with the students, I ask them to make counter arguments about why he might be wrong. Because I think he brings up some good points, but this is also a dude who obviously has never stood in front of an 80-piece group of middle school students in a band and needed to keep them busy. And I think this is where band is different from orchestra and choir, where orchestra and choir, we have hundreds of years of literature to draw upon. And there is a fighting chance that we are going to find some stuff that was composed by Mozart that our beginner strings might be able to play, or that we might be able to find something of the utmost quality for our children's choir to sing in unison. But something that was written for band and also is going to keep our 9 percussionists busy and also isn't going to require any of the students to have to play anything with complete independence on their own. I think this is trickier than the author leads us to believe, that it's as simple as, well, there's all this great music out there that if your kids can only play 6 or 7 pitches of band instruments and you are worried about classroom management, you could be picking, but you're just a simpleton moron and you're not, and you're picking the easy stuff that is the comic books and the candy. I don't think it's quite that simple.
Right, and I would agree with you there. And going back to my very, very first point, in that beauty and usefulness is truly in the eye of the beholder. And though the intent and the thoughtful design might not necessarily be there from that particular composer, the person educating our students, or the person in charge of these students, made that intentional choice to put that in front of their students for a reason. And that, I think, we do need to give some of these pieces and maybe some of these composers a little break. And that it's ultimately up to the conductor of the ensemble to put it in front of the students. And if that's what they and their expertise think is best for their students, then we have to trust that it's coming from a good place.
And full disclosure, I'm saying that as someone who composes those types of pieces. And I'm not for one second going to claim that I am on the same level as an Omar Thomas or a Leonard Bernstein or anything like that. But I have had plenty of teachers who are directing beginning music ensembles say, thank you so much for writing stuff that the students can play and sound good and they enjoy playing and they enjoy rehearsing. Because sometimes in middle school, directors will pick music by the quote unquote great composers or these pieces that are held up as being of the utmost quality. And they spend the first 6 weeks trying to convince the students, yeah, I know this doesn't sound very good yet. I know you don't like rehearsing it, but just hang on and it's going to be great. And I think there's a time and a place for that. And then also, when we're just trying to get them excited to not quit the viola, we just need them to have fun sometimes. And so, to that end, I'm okay with a little bit of selling out. So, from my standpoint, if you are programming a concert, I wouldn't want the whole thing to be sell out. But if you've got one thing in there that is making all of those sixth graders super excited and maybe call that the comic book piece, and then that allows you to get some of the Shakespeare into their curriculum as well, then I don't really see a problem with that. What about you?
Steve, I'm just glad that you shared what you did about your own music because I was worried you weren't going to share the feedback you've gotten on your beginner band pieces because I have heard the same thing.
I'm glad you chimed in, Alan, because I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think, Steve, you might be selling yourself a little bit short because, in fact, in my preparation for the podcast, I did listen to a lot of your beginning band stuff and a lot of your music for younger musicians, and I think it's fantastic. But I think going back to the first point is that you're doing that with intent and with thoughtful design and intentional choices in mind when you're writing it. And you're not just trying to make a buck, which is unfortunately a common thing, I think, in our profession.
Well, I appreciate that. And my fear is that we read those articles in the Washington Post or we go to the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic and we have these clinics where it's the curriculum is so important. You have to put good stuff in front of the students. You have to put good stuff in front of the students. And I totally agree with that. But I do think that sometimes we feel this pressure. We go too far the other way and then the students quit and then we get to give them no curriculum at all.
And I agree. And for me, a way that I've tried to find a happy medium between both scenarios is that throughout the last, I think, 5 to maybe 8 years, there's been a push for composers of high quality music for band, orchestra, and choir to write more for beginning ensembles like yourself. Your wife has a piece out as well that I listened to last night that I thought was just delightful. And I'm not getting paid by the Shanleys to
Yeah.
mention.
No. It's Valerie Shanley. If you're looking
Yes.
for this, it's Valerie Shanley.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece of music. And Aaron Perrine has a really nice one out for younger band, Joni Green. Like, so there are these composers that have written some music that have won really prestigious awards that also are writing music for younger bands, including a couple Pulitzer Prize winning composers, Kevin Putz, Tanya Leone. Like, they both wrote a piece for developing bands.
That's good. Listeners need to check all of that out. Let's wrap things up with number 5. So to recap, so far we've had balance and structure, uniqueness and surprises, consistency and cohesion, genuineness and ingenuity, and bringing it home with craftsmanship and orchestration. What do you have to say about that one?
For me, it means the piece of music is skillfully orchestrated and it's balancing different textures and colors with an appropriate amount of solo slash chamber playing versus 2D ensemble playing. And for me, this last criteria of craftsmanship and orchestration is the last one that I consider as it typically takes the most time. But if a piece checks the other 4 boxes, for me, it's important to then get into the weeds a little bit with the orchestration and scoring of chords. And I think we have to be very careful here and consider that the demo recordings of these pieces on most websites are played by professional or very
Yep.
advanced musicians who can make a piece with not so great orchestration sound great simply because their ensembles have perfect instrumentation and musicians that perform at a very high level. For me, I take a look at, all of the major cadential points, right? And if it's say it's a seventh chord and they have every single flute and the oboes and all alto saxophones on the seventh of the chord. That might be an issue in my ensemble with 23 flutes and 18, 18 saxophones, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would say that right there, more than any of the others, is probably why my wife's stuff or my stuff sells, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I know that the band that's going to be playing it is probably not going to have one alto saxophone. They might have 11 and they might have 12. And so I'm very careful when, for example, for me, a lot of this stuff isn't going to have seventh chords, but it's going to have lots of major triads. And so for a long chord, whoever has the major third, just being very careful who gets assigned that. Because I know that, yes, like you said, if it's the flutes and the first clarinets and the first trumpets, it's going to be like major third overload. And then to the audience, it sounds out of tune when it isn't even really that. It's just a super bad balance and blend issue. The other thing that I think is interesting about the orchestration standpoint, when we're talking about beginning singers, beginning instrumentalists, is, and you referenced that sometimes we've had these wonderful composers who are used to writing for the grown-ups, they're now writing for the younger students. And this is one area where, believe it or not, I think they can sometimes blow it. And that is not realizing that these students need to rest more than they think. And so in the instance of beginning band, orchestra, choir music, having breaks and different orchestration and places for them to rest is important, just so they can rest their voices or their chops, but then also to rest their brains temporarily as well. And I think that's something that we forget about. It's been so long since we all started learning our instruments, we don't realize just how taxing that is.
yeah, I fully agree with that. And that's, going back to the appropriate amount of solo slash chamber playing versus 2D ensemble playing, is that giving
Yeah.
people opportunity for breaks and both chop wise and brain wise. And concerning orchestration and scoring, as a composer, I want to ask you a question. Say I'm working on a piece by Steve Shanley, and we're getting to this section, and for some reason the chord's just not working with the
Revoice that, baby. Rewrite
Oh,
it.
thank you, Steve. Thank you for
Please. Yeah, I didn't even need you to finish that. I wish more people would do that, people will ask, hey, is it okay if we take the flutes down the octave here? I've got one really good flute who actually needs a challenge. Can we let him play up the octave or whatever? And I always tell them, I just want it to sound good. You know your students better than I do. If you need to make some changes to make it sound good, go for it. So that would be my take. Is that what you were hoping I might say?
That's exactly what I was hoping you might say, and I agree. I think it's something that everybody not everybody, but most people are afraid to do because, like you said, that's your take, and unfortunately, you don't speak for all composers, Steve.
No.
Um, but I would hazard a very educated guess that most of them would think like you do, and that they want their music to sound good. And if by sounding good, it means for these two measures, we need to take it down to one person per part. For just those two measures,
Mhm.
I'm of the opinion that they would be okay with that.
Yeah, I think so too. And part of this is the sort of how we have held up the composer or idolized the composer for hundreds of years. And we forget that when Brahms wrote a song, it was for voice and piano, and there wasn't really a lot of adjustment there. Or when Beethoven wrote a symphony, it was for pretty strict instrumentation. And as you mentioned earlier, we assumed everybody could probably play their instruments quite well or at the same level. And so this idea of the conductor needing to make changes to what Beethoven wrote or to what Brahms wrote would be incomprehensible. And I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon in, say, the last 100 years or so, where we have a lot, and I think this is great. We have, up until 100 years ago, you basically had to be born into a rich family to be able to get to make music like this. And otherwise, you were only making folk music. And now anyone almost can play the flute or the viola, but then that also creates balance problems, technique problems, inconsistencies. And so, yes, please, I think you need to make those changes to make it sound good. And one of my early mentors said, kids just want to be a part of something good. They want to be a part of something good, and they know if it sounds good or not. So if you need to make some changes to make it sound good, they're going to be okay with that. And my last point on that is tempo. I think a lot of composers would also be very happy if you reached out to them and said, so I know you have this tempo marking at 144. The students can't quite play it there. Are you okay at 132? And almost all of them are going to say, yes, I would much rather have them playing more of it and playing it musically at 132 than at my marked tempo.
Yeah, I agree there. And I'll quote a former teacher of mine and yours, I believe, Dr. Ron Johnson, who was famous for saying it's not how fast they can play it, it's how fast the audience can hear it.
Yeah,
And sometimes maybe that's not 144. Maybe it's 136 or, 132 for your band. So,
that's a great point too.
and for your audience, right?
Yeah, because they are not following along with scores. And even if we gave them scores, most of them wouldn't be able to read it. So, yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot for coming here, Dr. Petersen. It is always a pleasure to hang with you and talk with you. And if you want to learn more from Dr. Petersen, he's so accessible. He's always up for conversation and counsel. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Lucas?
They can send me an email at lhpeters@purdue.edu, and I will be happy to set up a meeting with them or set up a phone call and talk with anybody, anytime that we can make it happen.
Steve and Alan's Pro Tips in a Short Time